I'm Leah Gibson, and the coolest shit I've ever done is start my business with literally no knowledge or means to be starting a business.
Welcome back, my creative nerds. This is the Do More Cool Shit podcast. I'm your host, Sean McDonnell, and this is episode 52, where I get to sit down and share with you an amazing conversation that I had with Leah Gibson of Homebody Floral Company. But of course, before we jump into that conversation, I always want to look back and I want to look forward a little bit. If you didn't get a chance to go back and listen to episode 51, please go back and give that a listen, because if you're a creative and it's always so difficult because we're not following the past, right? We're always kind of a little bit askew, right? And I think it's so important that we figure out that authentic self, and that's exactly what that episode is. It's about diving a little bit deeper into authenticity, why that's important, and how to kind of get there a little bit. There's some tips and tricks in there. There's some studies in there. Give it a listen, and if you are struggling at all with trying to figure that out, let me know. I think it's so important that we keep practicing, we keep thinking about that, we keep talking about it. I think we lose ourselves as we grow, and we talk a lot about that in that episode. But of course, let's look forward to episode 53, where I want to talk about, which is coming out July 8th. So in another 2 Mondays, of course, every second Monday here, we got a new episode coming out. I want to talk a little bit about goal setting and time and timelines and how that matters and how all those things combine, right? So if we talk about where we left off, right, we're going to talk about a little bit about authenticity. Well, I couldn't think of anybody better who's living their authentic life, who's striving to get there, and who has set goals and has taken their time to get there and has a really nice sense of balance. And that's why I wanted to put Leah Gibson right in the middle of this. And of course, this episode is video recorded. So if you're listening on a podcast and you think, hey, I need some more red beard and I want to see an awesome interview in a lovely field, head over to YouTube, go check out the Do More Cool Shit channel over there on YouTube. We're there. You can see us. You can see Lee and I having our lovely conversation. And of course, if you just want to listen, we're on all the platforms. So give it a little listen. It's fine. It's fine. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't want to look at my face for an hour. That's fine. It's fine. But all right, let's get into the episode here. Leah Gibson, just an amazing human being. And I want to just highlight a few little things before we jump into that conversation. I love Leah and I had this amazing conversation. Of course, we talk about a lot of different things, but one of the things that came up fairly early and kind of kept recurring was this idea of paying attention to what keeps calling your name, especially as a creative, right? Especially as creatives, we need to be able to understand and listen to the things that are calling us, right? It's really hard, Life keeps pulling us in a million different directions. And we have these alluring, oppositions to what we want to be doing in life all the time, right? We're constantly being bombarded. We're being bombarded more and more now than any other time in life, by messages, by advertisements, by what we should be doing, what we could be doing, and it makes it really difficult. But Leah's story is one that I think is really, really cool because I listened to a lot of older interviews from Leah, and I read a lot of older interviews from Leah describing her future self, right? And what she thought she would be doing in old age. And let me tell you, Leah is not in old age now, and she is doing what she was saying thought she would be doing, back then, in far into the future. We're not that far into the future, and she's doing it. And she even said she was a little bit surprised that it's even within the same decade, and she didn't remember saying those things and thought that she would be talking about herself as a 60-year-old, And it's so interesting that as she started to listen to herself, as she started to listen to that calling, and as opportunities came and went and things worked out and things didn't work out, but she kept driving forward. Right. And I think that's so interesting. So we talk about that. We talk a little bit about asymmetry and an imperfection. in plants and in nature. And one of the things that Leah loves kind of about the world and about that is that it so nicely symbolizes kind of life, you know. And the more she embraces that, the more she understood. She'll talk a little bit about that. She talks a little bit about understanding that life and flower and nature and these imperfections are all such good metaphors, right, for how we're living our lives. And I think that's really cool. So we dive into that a little bit, and then we talked a little bit. We kind of navigate a little bit. We talk about starting small, starting easy. You'll hear her say in the very beginning and the very end, I friggin' love this part, right? Leap and believe even when you shouldn't. We talk about how she went into business and she had no prior knowledge, right? She talked about, she said this twice, right? She says at the very beginning, she talks about having no prior knowledge to running businesses, but she did it anyway, right? Because it's what was calling her. And then we talk a little bit about the end when she's talking about studio space and actually building a studio space herself, and how, again, she has no prior knowledge, but she'll probably do it, you know, and it's this idea, this knowledge of like, well, you just got to try it, right? And you don't have to invest everything, you know, you don't have to sell the farm, you know, to do the whole thing, right? I love that approach, and we talk about that a lot. You know, that's kind of sprinkled throughout the conversation, is that we talk about these small and easy steps. Yes, it's a leap, but it's not a Grand Canyon leap. It's like a puddle leap, you know, and it's all these little puddle leaps, and we think we're not making any progress. And I want you to picture that in your head. I want you to picture making these tiny leaps over little puddles, right, down the road. Well, it's not going to take too long before you look back and you're going to be like, holy shit, look how far down the road I am, right? Like it's crazy. You don't have to make this gargantuan leap in order to make these big changes, right? So anyway, I just want you to think about that as you're listening to this. Of course, we talked about, actually, this is one thing that I really love about Leah as well. It is a breadth and a diversity of income. Leah and I both are from Canada. We definitely have a winter season here where plants are not numerous, right? We're not growing a lot of flowers. So her ability to adapt, react, to be flexible, and to understand that as a creative especially, sometimes you have to diversify incomes and diversify them in a way that, one, duplicates some stuff, and two, still feeds the same need, right? So for her, a lot of that stuff is fashion and many other things in the winter, and I'll let her explain that, and we'll dive in there. But have that in the back of your head of like, what is the small thing that you have to do that's going to bring you in some money, but what are a few other things that maybe could be bringing you in money, but the same skill set and the same mindset, you know? So we talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, I asked the question here at the end, and we kind of dive into it of like, what do you want out of your life? Like, what does your day-to-day look like? And I think that's really important. And I think younger Leah would have said exactly what she's doing right now, you know, and she's so proud of that. So the whole conversation is just amazing. I hope you give it a listen. If you're on YouTube, you know, drop us a comment down below what you think of the episode, what was going on. If you're on any of the social media platforms, you know, give us a like, do the thing, you know, hit the button. It really means a lot to me, to us, to the Do More Cool Shit podcast, and to everything else that we're doing. It always encourages me to want to do more. Let me know other people that you want me to chat with too, because we're reaching out to all kinds of folks. And anyway, I appreciate you guys. Give this a listen. The whole conversation is amazing. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Leah. you just leaped.
Just leapt. Yeah,
just leapt.
Fully leapt. Probably shouldn't have, but did anyways. And yeah, 8 years later, and I'm glad I did.
That's when all the best shit happens.
Yeah. I guess that's the coolest. When I was thinking about the coolest shit I've ever done, it was really hard for me to come up with.
Yeah.
But
because you've done too many.
No, because I don't think, like, I think people, like you just said this other story of your friend, is it's hard to think of yourself in that way. Like, if you said, what's the coolest shit you've ever done, I would probably say nothing. I'm not, like, nothing I do is that cool. But when I was really, like, delving into it and trying to think of an answer for that, I was kind of picturing my, like, childhood self. Like, I had, like, two versions of me, like, childhood Leah and then, like, teenage Leah. And I was like, okay, what would she look at me doing now and think, like, damn, that's cool.
That's awesome. I like
and
that.
that kind of, puts you out of your, like, it's still from your own perspective, but not your present perspective. So, I thought childhood me.
What would she
me,
think was cool?
Yeah, she would be like, you're working with flowers? That's awesome. You run a business. Oh my gosh, how?
Yeah.
And you drive an old station wagon? Like,
cool as could be.
Cool. Like, I would be like myself's cool aunt.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yourself's cool aunt. That's how you know you've made it.
Exactly.
That's good. That's good. I like that because I have been watching and reading some things that you've put out in the world.
Okay.
And I was watching a video from 6 years ago.
Oh, God.
And it was funny that now you're thinking of what past self would you, because in that video, that was the Our Athena's video.
Oh, yeah.
I watched was 6 years ago.
Thinking of like 6 years ago, past self. Like.
Yeah. And you were talking about, it was in that, you were talking about picturing yourself in the garden with your cabin in the woods.
From older me's perspective.
Yeah, of the older lady. And I was like, I love it.
Like,
I love where we're going.
I will like go anywhere but the present.
But so funny that I think that's what you're doing now.
Yeah, interesting. Right? Yeah.
Like, I was like, I watched that video and I was like, oh, well, I think she's doing that right now.
That's true, actually. I haven't watched that. I kind of forgot about that. It would be interesting to revisit it and look back on what I was saying. But yeah, I remember saying like working in the garden with my dog and stuff.
Yeah, like literally in a cabin in the woods, you said. Which is 100% what you're doing right now.
Exactly what I'm doing right now, minus the dog. But yeah.
Minus the dog. Yeah. But that can come. That can come. Wild. That's amazing.
So yeah, that was in my mind 6 years ago. That was like 60 years out.
Right.
And now I'm doing it in the same decade.
Yeah.
So cool.
Which I think is so fascinating that like, I don't know, life is like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I find, definitely.
When I first came across your path, I think you were working in a skateboard shop. You were working at Burling, weren't you?
I was doing flower pop-ups there maybe, but I was never working there like full time.
In my head, you were like working there.
Maybe. That's cool. That would be cool.
I made that up.
I would think that I was a lot cooler if I was doing that. But they've always been good friends of mine over the years. So maybe we like crossed paths. Like, I hung out there.
Well, you were definitely in, like, you were in there, but in my head, you were probably there doing stuff. But flower pop-ups, yes, I do remember that, where you were doing like deliveries and pickups and
coffee related too. I was helping them out with kind of their coffee setup a little bit. So
that's what I think. So that's where I had first met you, which was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And then we ran into each other over time in a different coffee shop. Little Victories, shout out to them. And I always was like intrigued by just your energy, who you were. And then I saw your social media stuff and I was like, flowers, that's so fascinating to me. Like when you were growing up, did you ever think you could make a living doing what you're doing now?
No.
Like that's the thing that fascinates me.
Like immediate answer to that question is
right? No. Like when you're a little girl, you don't think, oh, I'm going to make flower bouquet. Like maybe work in a flower shop maybe is the thing.
Or maybe I'd like to do this, but I can't imagine ever getting paid to do this. It's like when you're really little and you say like you want to be a ballerina, or like there's these things that just seem really like idealistic or idyllic and like great but kind of unattainable.
Yeah, never gonna happen.
I wonder like what percentage of people actually become a famous ballerina and get paid for it. I don't know. But if you ask me when I was a kid, like I've always loved flowers. I've worked in the garden my whole life.
Yeah.
But I would have never thought I could make a living off of it, or that anyone would like my work enough to want to pay me for it. Like it's really interesting too, because when I think back in high school, I was kind of at a crossroads of like, you're kind of forced to choose what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life.
When you're like terrifying. 13 or 14. Yeah.
And I remember I was in high school and I was choosing a co-op placement. Did you guys do that in school too?
We had no co-op. Yeah,
for free.
I grew up in a very small town.
Okay.
There was like you were going to work at the gas station or the grocery store.
Do a co-op placement at the gas station.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
But no, so I was applying for co-op placements and I had applied to a flower shop and an elementary school.
Okay.
Because I was like, okay, what do I want to do? I love working with kids. I love flowers. Yeah. Like, how can I make this into a career? And so I had applied for both. Really wanted the flower shop gig.
Right.
Didn't get it. Got the school position. And so that kind of guided the next 5 or 6 years of my life thinking like, okay, I'm going to go be a teacher.
Right.
Just because this initial, and it just kind of confirmed for me that
and
like,
that's a
maybe
job.
This isn't, teaching's
that's
a job.
That's a job.
Yeah, that's a job.
People do that. They make money.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, so kind of went with that. But it's interesting when I think back how like many times the flower thing was kind of like an option, but that just felt a little too far out of reach. Like I had applied and didn't get it. And then cut to again after university, I was looking for a part-time job and applied to a flower shop and didn't get that. And like, it just kept like calling to me, but just wasn't quite like lining up for me at the times. So yeah, when I think back on it, it's definitely been a reoccurring like option or theme. But yeah, right. I never thought it would actually be something I could A, do on my own, and B, actually like get paid to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So fascinating. I feel like the world, that's really cool actually you said that, because I feel like I was supposed to be a computer engineer. That was my whole path. And I've talked about that so many times on the podcast, but fascinating that like something keeps coming back into your life and like that you left yourself open enough for it to
you're
keep
like
being like
nudged by this thing and you're like, okay, like maybe I should focus some attention on this. Yeah.
What was your love of flowers? Why? Like, especially when you were little,
thing.
you know?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because, like, everyone loves flowers.
Yeah, sure. Who doesn't love a flower? Yeah.
Who doesn't, but some people more than others, obviously. But it's an easy thing to love. But growing up, I was always, so my grandfather was a huge gardener. He had a cottage on Lake Simcoe.
Okay.
And I just, like, my earliest childhood memories are at this cottage in the garden. He had like the little yellow cottage on the lake, and then across the street they had a little plot of land where he had built a fenced-in garden, grew veggies, flowers, and like when I think of their property, I just think of like flowers. And also really cool because I think sometimes it is a more like feminine gendered role to be like in the garden or looking at flowers, which I'm also very open to it not being as well. My partner works with flowers in gardens as well, so yeah, so it was really cool to have this like male role model who was into gardening.
Right.
And those are like my earliest memories. And then back home too, my parents were really big gardeners. We had a lot less space, but my mom would grow annuals every spring. And then my dad and I, we had this one little section of the backyard that was maybe the size of this table. Yeah. And that was like Leah's garden. And every year he'd be like, what do we want to grow this year? And he'd get me set up and I could decide if it was going to be veggies or tomatoes or flowers. And that was like my project every year from before I could garden. So that kind of, I think, set me up with some experience of it at least, or just getting my hands in the dirt. That's
awesome. And just probably like that emotion, right? That emotional
exactly.
Like I was thinking about when I started making some of the notes for what we want to talk about, and I was like, you know, flowers, what, like it must be tied to emotions and humans.
Definitely. And that I still believe to this day, and that's why a lot of my clients feel the way they do. Like, it's such a nostalgic and emotional thing for me, which all art is, music, paintings, it's all just so tied to human emotion. And I love that about my job, that when I make someone a bouquet and give it to them, like a certain flower will strike a memory for them, or a certain color or smell. Like I gave a woman a bouquet this past summer and she texted me afterwards, and I was having an awful day, and was one of those days where I was like, do I even keep doing this? Was just feeling very down. And I get this text right after I deliver this bouquet, and this woman's like, oh my gosh, I had put one single sweet pea in her bouquet. And normally I wouldn't do that. I like to put more and like work in odd numbers and whatever. And I just had this nudge to put this one little sweet pea from my garden in her bouquet. And she texted me being like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of my mother. She always grew sweet peas. Like the smell is incredible. And it just invoked this like memory for the stranger who it felt like we shared this connection over gardening.
Yeah, right. And like someone that you didn't, like she just bought a bouquet.
Oh yeah, didn't. Like, it was a friend of mine's mom, and it was a last minute delivery, and like I threw it together, and I was still very happy with the result, but I brought it and was like, didn't think about it, and then get this like novel of a text just about how much it made her whole day, and like that brought her back to gardening with her mom as a kid. Like it's just such a like deep lineage of growers, and that's my favorite thing.
That's funny because one of my questions in here was, how do you get through like the shittiest times, like when as running a business, you have those ups and downs, totally. And everybody has them, and I was curious what gets you through. That's a good one. Those
connections for sure, and like there's days when it's hard and days when it's easy, but it's always that like kind of outside affirmation that reminds you of why you're doing it.
Right.
Especially when you're working alone all the time. Like, it's just me making flowers at my house. Like, I don't have staff or like a soundboard to be like, hey, do these colors look good together? Like, so a lot of my confidence, I guess, comes from this feedback from clients or people who interact with my work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially, I think that's something that I think a lot of creatives especially forget about, the lonely part of some of this work, definitely. Where it's like if you don't have a team, or like you said, you're assembling flowers by yourself, and that sounds like a dream, but do that for 78 days in a row straight by yourself.
It's great, but it's like too much of either. Like if I was just immersed in a team setting all the time, that would be overwhelming.
Right. Yeah.
But then being like, I could not leave my house for like a very long time, and that could get unhealthy too. So balance is good.
Balance is good, and I think people forget about that a lot in creativity. I'm really glad that you said that, because I mean that's kind of the whole thing of this podcast, is how do we balance that? Where does your confidence come from? Which is always on my mind. Do you remember the first time you ever sold, like when you transitioned from like, I like flowers and I have bouquets to like, I'm gonna sell one, and somebody bought it? Like, do you remember that feeling? Do you remember that idea?
The first thing that comes to mind with that, which is a little bit different, but the first memory I have of like working with flowers was in a flower shop that I had got hired into out of school. And it was the first day I was allowed to like touch the flowers. And there's a thing called conditioning or processing. It's where you make sure all the flowers are looking fresh and put them in a cooler. You remove all the leaves and whatnot. So I was processing flowers for the first time. And it was my first contact with working with flowers in a commercial setting. And I was processing them, and I just remember like smelling my hands as I was going, and it just smelled like fresh, like earth. And I processed a bunch of lavender, and then I got on the bus home at the end of the day and was just like sitting there smelling my hands. I must have looked like a nut.
Who's that weirdo on the bus?
The weirdo on the bus sniffing her fingers. I've never thought of that until
That's so funny, because in my head immediately I was like,
if
oh man.
I saw someone going down Gladstone on the 14, like, just like... so was doing that, and then I remember my mom called me, and she's like, how did your like first week out?
Because how old were you?
I was fresh out of university, so I must have been like
early 20s.
I don't remember how old I was, but it would have been the year 2015.
Okay, okay.
So
it's a little while ago.
Early mid 20s.
Yeah.
But and then my mom called, and she's like, how'd it go? And I was like, Mom, like I got to work with lavender today. Like it smells great. Like it was just like, or I got to process these flowers. Remember when you grew those in our garden? And there was just this whole other level of like, and I've never done that before, where I've been so excited about something to like immediately tell my mom.
Right.
But just the fact that it was like, oh my gosh, I did this thing. And like, it just immediately felt like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be.
Right.
Which I hadn't felt before.
Oh, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And that energy, I always love that. Like that's when you know, when you're like, oh, I just have to keep doing this.
I just knew, like,
I just have to keep touching flowers.
I felt it emotionally, and like it's not the easiest job. Like it has its ups and downs too, but just the whole time I just have never questioned. Well, I said I did earlier.
No.
There's those moments where you're like, oh my gosh.
It's a small question.
It's a small question, and it's not a real question. You're like, of course I'm going to keep doing this. But
no, there are many days
just
when
known like this is what I'm meant to be doing, and then on those rougher days, it is. I just have to remind myself.
There are many days when I'm like, man, I would love to have a boss to just help me, just tell me what to do, because I'm tired of making decisions.
Yeah.
But that is a very fleeting thought. You know, I've been living and working in the creative world for 20 years now, and every so often you get that like, I don't know, that moment where you're just like, oh man, I'm just tired of making all decisions.
Yeah,
Could someone just tell me? And then I'm like,
moment.
no, it's gone. And then I was like, oh God, imagine if somebody told me what to do on Thursday.
Exactly.
I was like, oh God.
And you actually picture yourself. You're like, no, actually, I don't think I really
actually,
like
you're like, no, I don't want that.
Totally.
No, yeah,
There is that, like, sometimes I think about that too, where it's just like, if someone just told me.
Yeah.
That like decision fatigue, or it's like, and then it's funny because when I'm feeling that way, I'm then like, okay, did I eat lunch today?
Right.
Did I drink water today? And usually I can step away from what I'm doing and do that. And then if I go back to it and I still feel that way, then it's worth like thinking about. But usually it's just that I'm grumpy.
Right. Yeah.
Or like something's not working out. I didn't sleep well.
Yeah.
Or it's that something that I'm making like isn't flowing as easily. And like the answer isn't, oh, I need to go work for the government. It's, oh, I need to go take a break right. And then revisit this.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah. I need to go work for the government.
Just no offense.
No, you could.
But it's easy to be like, oh, wouldn't it just be so easy to like clock in and clock out?
Yes. Yeah.
But you have that thought, and then you're like, no, actually, it wouldn't.
Yeah. No, I would never want to do that. You know, if it's like that thought of like, oh God, that would be so light and airy and nice. You know. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's really funny. So when did you sell your first bouquet?
Okay, so my first bouquet. You know. It must have been a Mother's Day weekend. Or no, it was, okay, my first bouquet, I didn't sell it, but it was my first time going into the wholesale market and like buying flowers.
Okay.
I remember like walking in there and it's like, oh my gosh, all these options. And I bought all my favorite flowers and I put together a few bouquets just to like give to people to be like, hey, I'm a business now. And I made like one for my partner at the time's mom and a couple like businesses on Wellington West and just like popped in and introduced myself and was like, hey, I'm making flowers if you need it. Amazing. Didn't even have a business card yet or a business name or like an email address. But I was like, here's my cell phone number. I have access to flowers if you need them. And it just felt, that felt
Where did
really
you
good.
wholesale flower? Like, I don't even know that process. Like in my head until you said it.
This is really interesting because I don't really do this anymore. Right. And so that really is like kind of a comment on how my business has evolved too. Right. But when I first started, I was wholesaling flowers. So there's a place called like a flower market and it's basically a giant walk-in cooler of flowers that have been imported from all over the world. So you can walk in anytime and get roses in the middle of February. You can get tulips. Like it's just a
is this for grocery stores
get them?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
that doesn't even. You know, it's funny. I see that. I've never processed it. Yeah, until you just said, like, I wholesaled flowers. And I was like, oh, right.
And because I think we're all just starting to think that way about food.
Yeah.
Like, that's a relatively newer thing where you're at the grocery store and you're like, where did this come from? And so I think flowers are kind of the next step in that awareness is like, okay, these are from my local grocer, but are they getting them locally?
Right.
Usually the answer is no, sometimes yes. But so when I first started, I was working with imported flowers, which is how a lot of people start because it's accessible. Yeah. I lived in the city. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a garden. You know.
How else were you going to do it?
Yeah. Do. And plus coming out of working in a flower shop, that's what they were using. So it's what I was familiar with.
Right.
Anyway, so you go into this giant walk-in cooler and you buy flowers. And they're coming from like Ecuador, Holland. Yeah, they've.
We're in Canada, so buying any of those flowers.
No, and so that's how I've shifted my business.
Right.
Is, I really, as I started trying to ask that question more of where are my flowers coming from, and like encouraging my clients to ask those questions. So I started trying to source local flowers from farmers. Which I still do. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, okay, I can't mess around anymore. Like I'm only sourcing because I had started kind of integrating it and I was like, okay, if this is available locally, I'll get it. But if not, I'll order it in or, you know, and then the pandemic hit and I was like, I need to shift this in a way that feels ethical and sustainable to me and my philosophy. Right. So I shortened my season. I used to do this work all year round. I shortened my season from May to October because that's when things are growing here.
Right. Yeah.
I don't do like Christmas or Valentine's Day arrangements because I can't get flowers in that time of year. And that's been a big way that
we don't have flowers here.
Yeah, exactly. And like I'll make that exception sometimes. Or this time of year, I actually can go buy from my wholesaler. I can say, hey, can you get me an Ontario grown ranunculus? And they can do it, or Canada grown at least. And I'm just really asking those questions and getting it when I can, and then if I'll still import like the odd thing if someone's really keen on it, or yeah, I would say 95% of my stuff is grown in Canada, if not in Ottawa area.
And what percentage, because you grow a lot.
Yeah.
What percentage is grown by you?
So hopefully more
you also
this
grow
year,
a lot,
because I just started really like establishing
Right.
my cut garden. This will be my second season. So last year I started with 4 raised beds.
Right.
Which is still not that much, but we also have more like gardens around the property too.
Right,
but
sure.
the plan this year is to build like maybe 4 or 6 more and just keep adding on slowly.
That's awesome. Because you just kind of moved to the property you're on now, right?
We just moved
not very long
so
ago?
October 2022.
Right.
So it's been a little over a year and a half ish.
Yeah.
But yeah, the goal is to grow 90% of my own stuff, and then I have lots of farmers around my area too who are a 15-minute drive from me. If my peonies aren't looking so hot, I can go grab them from them. But so
that's awesome. That's really good. What I want to go back to when you are making a flower bouquet or arrangement.
Yes.
How do you decide? And what do you do whenever it doesn't look right?
Yeah. So I always kind of joke about this because it's interesting working with a craft that like already looks beautiful.
Right.
Like a painter, looking at this painting on your wall. A painter like starts with all these colors, and those colors are beautiful, but they don't really resemble anything until they're translated into a painting.
Right.
But I get all these things that are already like beautiful. So I don't have to put, it doesn't take a lot to make them look nice. It would take a lot to make them look bad, I should say.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
But there's also certain
people
ways.
do it. I've definitely seen bad arrangements.
Or definitely like different tastes.
There you go. That's the next polite way to say it.
Yeah, but I would say like for me it always starts with like what's seasonal and growing, and then I always like I'm obsessed with colors and how colors like look and feel together and make me feel, and like, so I guess in the same way of like painting, like choosing your colors, like I always start with kind of a color palette and then put it together from there. And then as I'm arranging it, like there's definitely times when I'm not happy with how it's turning out, and that's usually when like I'm really stressed or tense.
Right.
It's kind of like translating into what I'm making.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but usually, I like work on like some principles of like colors, and I work in odd numbers and try and make it like really asymmetrical and like natural looking. Yeah. So I look to like what's growing in the garden and how it's growing at different heights and different textures, and that's kind of what I try and just recreate in my designs. Yeah.
Actually, I love that. You brought us right to the next point, because I was going to say in 2018 I read something somewhere where you wrote or said nature is never symmetrical or perfect.
Yeah.
And I love that, and I feel like that was something like creatives have such a hard time with.
Yeah.
Specifically, it's always like, oh, I shouldn't release that, or I shouldn't let this out, or and how often do you practice your craft? Are you practicing every day?
Not every day, no. And what I'll say about that too is, how do I describe this? So art, like different styles of art change and whatever, and floral design, like from the beginning, was very, very like tight and controlled and like a status symbol, and like it was very like not like very removed from nature feeling. Right. And when my first job in a flower shop, I would be making designs, and my boss at the time would always say like, it's too wild, like tone it back.
Oh, interesting.
Tone it back, tighten it up. Like, there's like a specific like design that a lot of people go for traditionally with flowers.
Was there a flower mafia?
I can't.
Yeah, we can't say it. Yeah, we can't say it. That's so funny.
No, but yeah, so my designs, like I try to make less tight and forced, and like I really want it to feel like wild and loose and fun. Yeah. What was the question?
Which I think you've nailed it. Well, I was just talking about the symmetrical and perfect thing, and like how nature is like that, and does that translate?
Yeah, so I try and make things, asymmetrical and like different heights, different textures. I really like it when I can use a flower in multiple stages. So when it's like before it's opened and it's still in the bud, when it's wide open, and then if I can get it in like a seed form too, just to like see the whole lifespan of it is kind of cool. But yeah. Is that
That's cool. Yeah. No. Yeah. I just like that idea that like the perfection part of like how, like, I love that you were talking about that, and that was part of your mindset of like, I don't know. I love that that's what you brought from nature, you know? And I feel like so many creatives and so many, you know, we just really struggle all the time with like, oh, do I release this? Do I not release that? Do you make bouquets that don't see the light, and then you're like, forget, like, I'm not that, I can't photo that, I can't share that? Absolutely.
More often than I do share, probably. Yeah. And you were asking about how often I play or practice, and that's something I'm really bad for, that I have, like, continuously made a goal each year to do more of.
Right.
When I look back, the best year for that was 2020.
Okay.
When I had no jobs.
Oh, when you were just, like, starting out.
And the flowers were still growing, and I was like, okay, I think I made it a goal once a week to make myself an arrangement. Just to practice and keep in it, and just like that's when I think the biggest like realizations come, or the coolest things that you make are when you're not really making them for anyone or to be photographed, or it's just when I'm like messing around for myself and it's gonna go in my kitchen, or maybe I'll throw it straight in the compost.
Right. Yeah. Made it and then got rid of it.
Yeah. So I think that's really important. Something that I definitely need and want to be doing more, and I think will be easier to do now that I'm growing all of my own stuff, or most of my own stuff. But it's really important just to give yourself that space to play and mess around.
Yeah, I think that's so. Yeah, I think it's so important. You know, and I think we live in a world now too where it's easier to do that. Like you can like no matter what medium you have, like you have access to, you know, if you're starting out painting, go to the dollar store and get some paints, you know, and just you know, so it doesn't bankrupt you, you know. And it's like, you know, if you're starting out, if you want to do starting flowers, you can go out in nature and probably find some flowers.
And
you don't have to spend thousands of dollars, you know. Or
like if you're learning music, like just mess around on the guitar. But I'll
get a cheap guitar and just mess around. Yeah,
exactly. Like you don't have to commit to it all in before trying it. And people ask me that all the time, like, how do I how do I start? Started? Or it's like, and I always just tell them, like, I used to just like ride my bike along the canal and pick a few wildflowers. Like, be careful what you're picking, obviously, but or go to the grocery store and buy a bouquet and like take it apart and put it back together, or split it up into different vases. Like, there's so much you can do just to like get a taste of it before,
without spending $1 million.
Oh yeah.
You know, actually that's what I love when you said earlier about the coolest shit you've ever done, and like starting with I'm always a fan of that. I'm like, you can just start with nothing. And we have so like, there was a young student came into the studio the other day. Well, although clearly we're out in a field right now, but
no studio.
Yeah, there's no studio here. We're in this field. But this young student came in and was asking me, they wanted to start some video production. And I said, well, have you made any videos? And they're like, no, I don't have a camera yet. And I said, well, do you have a cell phone? And, you know, and it was like, oh, well, you can still think of, and she was really trying to make it as complicated as possible. Right. She was like, well, I need a director and I need some lighting. And I was like, oh, no, you don't.
Yeah, and it's so easy to think that way. I'm like, okay, I need the most expensive camera. And I can't start until I have X, Y, Z. Or even me when starting with flowers, it was like, okay, well, I need a cooler and I need a vehicle. Like, there was all these things. I was like, I need snips and this and this and ribbon and that. And it's like, realistically, you need flowers. Like, pick the one thing that it revolves around, and that's all you need. And you can access that as like on the smallest or largest scale that you are able to. Yeah. But when I started, I was living in a bachelor apartment. Yeah. Didn't have a car.
Like, you were not in the ideal setting.
No, zero. Like, I wasn't even working in it long enough to really understand. Like, I have no business experience.
Right.
I was fresh out of university and had worked in a flower shop for a bit. But other than that, just knew that I loved flowers and, like, kind of hoped the rest would figure itself out or fall into place. But, I was, like, Ubering to the flower market and back. I was borrowing friends' cars. I was putting stuff on my visa. Like, I would, like, before, like, a client would order a bouquet, and I would like take that money out of my own pocket until I got paid for it. Like, it was very bare bones.
You were investing in yourself and hoping it returned.
Yeah. And again, but in very small
ways. Yeah. You don't have to start. Yeah. I always think that. It's like,
it doesn't have to be perfect and like ready. And like, I am guilty of thinking that way too, but it's like, just what do you absolutely need?
Yeah.
And that's all you need.
Yeah. What do you remember what you charged for your first bouquet?
Probably like $20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've always been pretty good. Like, that's not 8 years ago. That's not too bad.
Okay.
But I was talking with my partner about this morning, actually, is I've always been like pretty good at charging fairly and advocating for myself and my fellow small business owners too. Like, that's something I've always from the get-go, because I've worked for so many other small businesses.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say why, where did that come from?
Yeah, but
you've worked in small businesses.
Because I've worked in small businesses and I've seen every scenario.
Right.
And like, if you came to me and said like, listen, am I worth this much? I'd be like, yeah, like charge me. You're worth it. Charge more.
Yeah.
Like, I've been like that from the beginning, and I would always like turn something down instead of undercharging. Or I would, like a lot of people think when they're getting started that they have to do a lot of stuff for free to like build awareness in a portfolio. And like, yes, that's valuable to a certain extent, but when it comes to like undercutting yourself and your industry and other creatives, like no one's benefiting from that.
Yeah.
So I've always been a huge like advocate for like
I think people don't think about that.
appropriately.
Like undercutting your industry. But yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, not at all. Like, just charge what you're worth.
Yeah.
And you're probably worth more than you think.
And your gut will tell you that often.
Yeah.
Like I'm always like, well, like people will say, I work with people and they'll say, well, what's that? I was like, well, what does your gut say? Just tell me what your gut says, and they'll blurt it out and they're like, oh, but that's too much. And I'm like, no, don't say that last part.
Yeah.
Just say
that part.
And it's okay. It's okay if somebody can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And it's hard.
It's okay.
Yeah.
And
But say it like, yeah.
Like they might, I've had definitely examples where people have not been able to afford me or whatever, for whatever reason, in whatever industry, whatever we were doing, and then go away. Everybody was sad, but then they come back and they're like, hey, we got the money. And I'm like, that's amazing. And we would love to work with you. And I'm like, okay.
I appreciate what you're doing specifically. Yeah. And those are the clients that you want. Right. You don't want the ones that are just trying to find the cheapest bid because they don't actually care about your work or what you're doing. That sets you apart from everyone.
I think that's so important. That's really good, actually. And undercutting the whole industry, I think, is such a thing. Things that people don't think about is like, oh, well, I want to be the cheapest on the market. And I'm like, okay, but you do want to, but are you paying your bills, Are
you paying your bills? Are you paying your staff fairly?
Yeah,
are you paying yourself? Are you
setting yourself up down the road?
Exactly, because it's going to be harder than, like, if you're just trying to get all these cheap gigs, it's going to be harder down the line to raise your prices because people are going to be going to you not because you make the best work, but because you're the cheapest. Right. And then you're going to have a hard time, like, doubling back on that. But yeah, it's hard when you quote someone and someone else is willing to do it for less than what you could even spend on materials. Yeah. And it's like, great, they're going to maybe like get some nice photos out of this and maybe they need that right now and everyone's in a different place in their business, I understand. Yeah. But then what is that doing for the expectations for everyone else?
We did some renovations, I guess last year, and we got 3 quotes. And the 2 quotes were very similar. And one quote was about a third of the price. And I was like, why? Why? How? Like, I was so confused. I was like, how could he charge so little?
Yeah, it makes you consider.
I'm like, what corners is he cutting?
There's a reason for this.
Yeah, I was like, what corners is he cutting? Yeah. Where? Yeah. I was like, I don't know.
There's a catch here. I'm suspicious.
Whereas
otherwise it's like, I don't know. Or say you met these 2 contractors and one was charging more, but they were like, very lovely to be around. Like, if you have that connection, and that's what I hope to get, and I'm sure you hope to get with people you work with too, is like, I know if I were hiring a florist or photographer or anything, like, the most important thing to me is like the person behind it and the connection there. And I would expect that to be more expensive.
Right.
And I would want to support that.
Yeah. And I want to support folks that are doing good work, and
exactly,
I want them to do it for a long time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. Okay, that's good.
It's investing in the kind of makers you want to see out there.
Yeah, it's true, right? Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about was the people that you get to work with, because I think that's probably a huge part. Like, you get to work with flowers, but also in your industry, you probably meet a whole ton of people.
Yeah, you get to meet a ton of people. And that's my favorite part too. Again, when like most of my work is done pretty solitary.
Yeah.
It's nice to get out and deliver what you've been working so hard on and like see the immediate reaction and meet people. Yeah, it's been really cool. I love making people cry. Like good, happy cry.
Like that. Yeah,
That's like the best compliment I can get when like a bride or celebrant sees their flowers and is just like in tears. I'm like,
you're like, I did it.
Nailed it.
I nailed it.
Don't even write me a testimonial. This is
can I just take a photo of you crying?
Yeah, can you
That'd be good. I'll just put that up.
Microphone.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I love those connections.
That's really funny.
I just love the people.
Well, and your business is so multifaceted too. Like I was like, okay, Leah, that's cool. She sells flowers.
Yeah.
People buy bouquets. But then I was like, wait, like when I started like thinking and like looking at all the things you're doing and how you're doing it,
it's more than
that also was really intriguing me too. Like the subscription packages, the wedding stuff, obviously, you know, and I was like, okay, so can we just talk about like where and how all that evolved?
All of that evolved over time. But also another thing that I should mention of my business is me, essentially. Like it's a floral business, but it's me as an individual. And that is also like my social media work, and brand work, and a lot of like fashion stuff, which is another passion of mine, which that all kind of stemmed out of, again, when I had to balance my off season. So I stopped doing flowers all year round and squished it into 6 months. And I'm like, okay, what can I like do the rest of the year?
Right. What do I do for the other 6 months?
Exactly. That I can enjoy and like will also like have some income for me. And so that's where kind of the other side of like the social media work and brand work has come in, which is great. And balance.
You've been doing that for a while, right? Like some of the brand work stuff? Like,
been a while. And again, have met really cool people and really lovely brands doing that, which is amazing. Like again, teenage me, if she heard I was working with some of the brands that I've had the opportunity to work with, would be like, sick.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome.
So that's a good way to balance it.
Didn't you just take a trip?
I just took a trip. I went to New York City, which was terrifying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But loved every minute of it.
But that was kind of brand.
It was brand work. It was to help a friend of mine who runs a small business, actually. And we were looking at some like small fashion designers to bring out to Perth. Like that was very cool. My dream.
Very
like
cool.
Teenage me watching MTV, watching The City in the Hills would have been like awesome.
That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah, so a lot of cool, and just really great opportunities have come up through that. And then so there's that whole side of my business that is kind of like collaborating with companies, and then there's the floral aspect, which the two do intertwine and cross paths. But the floral stuff, I've got the weddings and then subscriptions I just started doing in 2020 because I had no weddings and was like, okay, how can I continue making flowers? And also people were really stoked on ordering local things and having it delivered to their doorstep because they couldn't go out and interact with people or things. So that was a good year for the subscriptions to launch for sure. And then, just
how'd you come up with that idea? Where did that idea spring from?
Well, it sprung from the CSA program that a lot of veggie farms do in the area. I saw farms like Full Moon Farm and Terramore doing these veggie CSA boxes. And I thought like, wow, like these have been around forever, but during the pandemic became even more like important and cherished by people, I think. So it was inspired by that. And I'm not the first person to do bouquet subscriptions, so I had seen other people doing that as well. And just, I just thought like, okay, once a month. And then it's a good way too, it's the idea of CSA is community supported agriculture is people are buying things at the head of the season before it starts. And then I know exactly how many bouquets I'm selling.
Right.
I know it down to how many stems I'll need of each flower. And it allows me to plan like what I'm going to order, what I'm going to plant, what I'm going to be harvesting. And it also like really minimized waste. Because I find if I'm doing a pop-up somewhere or anything like that, it's a lot of fun and I get to meet a lot of people, but I'll go home with bouquets sometimes.
Right.
So it was a way for me to be like, okay, it's kind of like the pre-order idea of if you're selling this shirt.
Sure.
Take pre-orders and then make the shirt after. So
and you know you're going to make exactly this many. Yeah.
You know how many you're going to make.
That's
you know how much money you're going to make. You know that there's going to be no extras. So the bouquet subscription has been really just a way to, like get that like support up front at the beginning of my season when I've just had the winter off, and it allows me to plan what I'm going to plant. And I have no waste, and I'm
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And you're doing that through the website, but you also have Patreon as well.
I have a
right?
Patreon too, which is a new thing.
I was like, that's also new and fun. And like in our world, like I know lots of folks that have Patreon, and that's why I was super excited about seeing that you. We don't have one yet, but we're working to it. But I know I work with a lot of folks and a lot of creatives that do have Patreon accounts, and I'm like, that's an awesome, another jump, another revenue stream.
Exactly, and that's like I'm all about like diversifying. Like obviously, don't take on too much, but if it's fun and you're drawn to it and it diversifies your income, then great.
And if you can duplicate things, probably like I would imagine now you're getting to duplicate some stuff, maybe where it's definitely. Like I have to do this anyway, so I might as well. It's a little more
streamlined.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, again, that came from the idea of having. Like, I know I have this many people. Obviously, they can come and go, and each month I'll make around this much, and that'll allow me to, like, budget out my year a little better. Kind of like the subscriptions are just brilliant.
Yeah, it's nice to...
Anyway, and in any way you can do that for your business. Like, gyms do it.
Right, yes, right.
Coffee subscription. Like, I'm sure it's so cross-platform that you could sell anything in a subscription format. But, yeah, just, again, to have that, like, pre-knowledge, like a plan, it gives you like a sense of stability in an industry being creative that feels very unstable. Yeah,
exactly. Knowing that you're like, okay, I know I'm going to make at least this amount of money for this month, at least, and I'm going to put this many posts, and I'm going to spend an hour or whatever on each post and XYZ. But That's cool. What got you onto Patreon? Was it just the idea that you had some subscriptions, and you were like, maybe
I had never been a subscriber on Patreon, but I had been a fan of Substack. Okay. And I had a couple of Substacks that I subscribed to as a customer and loved them. Substack felt very like written format to me, and while I love writing, that isn't my like main source of sharing, I think. And so Patreon just felt a little more visual. Yeah. Felt like somewhere I could still be like taking pictures or shooting video and putting it there. And it felt more visual, and it felt like a blog basically. So I was like, okay, I'm going to look at this as a paid blog. And I'm going to share what I'm doing in the winters and in the summers. And it's just going to be a little more intimate and in depth than what I'm sharing on Instagram for anyone who like wants a little closer access to me or to like ask me questions. Like sometimes I can't get to DMs and stuff like that. So it's just a little more of a like curated, intimate space where I can also control who's viewing it too. Like if I get a subscriber and it's like, I don't know, looks sketchy, I can block them, or if they're like leaving weird comments. This hasn't happened, but in my mind.
But it could.
I have the option. Like it's very controlled in my mind. Like I do share a lot online, but I also am quite a private person. Yeah. So I get a new subscriber.
Hence homebody floral. Yeah. Like homebody. You know, I'm out there, but also homebody. But
I'm also in here.
That is homebody.
So it's a little easier to be like, okay, new subscriber, Jane Doe. Okay, great. And then I message them like, hey, tell me a bit about yourself. And they'll say like, I'm from London. I grow flowers. Like, I'm interested in this. And like, it just feels like a lot more of like, again, it's that connection that I'm looking for. Not necessarily just, it feels weird to just have someone pay to be there and like never interact with. Right. I don't want that like stranger. Like I already get that on Instagram. Right. And it just feels a little more like a little family.
And you're doing a lot of, like you have some of the workshop elements in there, or like you're teaching some things, right? I think if I've got that right, I see like there's some videos I think that are there that are teaching people how to do stuff.
Do some videos, really like cool. I try and make it very like subscriber tailored. So if someone's like, hey, I'm going to be starting my seeds soon. Like, what do I do? Right. And I'll share my process on starting seeds, or even like the fashion thing too. If someone's like, hey, I'm looking for a sweater I can wear every day. And I'll kind of like be their stylist and like spend the time on the internet, like picking some things for them. It's just like a really fun space where I can combine like all of my passions. Yeah. It's flowers, it's gardening, it's outfits, it's wellness. Like it's just a little bit of everything.
That's cool.
And people can do like Q&As or request posts, and then I'll make that for them.
That's great. Yeah. Well, and you've been doing the social media game for a long time, right? Like you've been on there for
I've been on there for probably like 10 years.
I was going to say, I think like Homebody's been around.
Homebody's been around since at least, I was in university.
I think the first post I saw was 2016. maybe
that tracks.
maybe
maybe a little earlier.
Maybe even earlier, yeah.
I think I definitely made it a little earlier. I might have not kept all the posts.
yeah, I'm sure stuff have come and gone, but yeah.
Yeah, but that stemmed... Homebody was a nickname of mine in university for obvious reasons. Really all funny. Of my roommates were real party girls, and I was not. And yeah, so that just kind of became a nickname of mine. And that when I was signing up for Instagram, I was like, I don't know, what do I put? Like, username Homebody. Okay, it was taken. I put an underscore on. So that's kind awesome. Of just been what I've stuck with.
That's really funny.
Since then, and then now has become my business name. So it works.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And then talk to me a little bit about like the idea, like so now you're on this property.
Yeah.
And as you were starting to make some money and making this a real living.
Yeah.
Was there any point too where you had to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna live a simpler life, or I'm gonna I don't know, because I feel like everything I know or see or hear about you, it just looks like it's nice.
Yeah.
It just feels like your life is nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. I love it. It's not nice all the time, sure. Obviously. But yeah, no, I've worked really hard for a very long time. And like, to use this property as an example, like this is where I've wanted to be and be doing for years. Like I said in that interview before, I pictured myself as an old lady.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And like I never thought it would happen this soon, of course. But I've worked really hard for a long time on my own business. I've also kept other streams of income. I've like lived quite minimally, and my business has run like very bare bones. Like keep in mind, I've not paid rent in like I've paid my rent.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But I haven't been like leasing downtown, out space. Yeah. I'm not open 24/7. I don't have employees. I don't like. I've been very bare bones for a very long time, and I haven't really invested in my business other than like buying materials, of course. I've never taken outside investment. Yeah. Like it's been like 8 years now that I've been making do with what I've got. Right. Which has gotten to me to a point now where I am where I want to be. And like from the beginning, this was the vision for the business. Right. But obviously I couldn't get there right away. Right. And I'm very glad I'm there sooner than I ever thought was possible. But yeah, now I'm just at the point where I'm like, okay, I can invest some of this. I also like didn't pay myself for many years. I was really keeping it tight. Right. So I'm at a point now where like I can pay myself when I do an event, and I can, build this garden, and this year I want to build a studio space for myself. And like, that's cool. These are investments in my business that I'm just now able to start considering. It took a long time, and I think that's the thing too. I don't know. I feel like people are like, oh wow, like you just popped up out of nowhere. It's like, no, I've been at it a long time. And like, again, like starting where things might not look how you would like them to look, and being okay with that to get you to a point where the full idea comes into fruition. Yeah. I also feel like you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I feel like you've done a lot of work to know exactly the things you want in your life, which I don't think a lot of people do. I think our world just kind of, moves so fast, but I feel like you've probably been more mindful of the things you want in life. I think so. I think I'm very particular. I know what I like. I know where I want to be. There has been things where that hasn't been the case that I'll explain. But I feel like I've been pretty good of like having a vision, a very specific vision of where I want to be and what I want to be doing, and working towards that without distractions. There has been things that have come up along the way. Like I have almost opened a retail space. Okay. I have almost leased a studio. I have, there's been opportunities, and it's so interesting as a creative or a small business owner. I think like a lot of opportunities are constantly coming your way. And in my mind, it's kind of like a video game. Like things are like flying at you. Yeah. And you have to decide like, oh, I'll take that. I'll pass. Like I'll try this, and maybe it'll be cool, but maybe it won't. And so there's been a lot of things where I've really like considered things, and it's just, for me, it's been about staying very mindful and intentional. like, for example, I was at one point going to take over that coffee shop and
Right,
make it a
right.
coffee shop,
Yeah.
flower shop.
Okay.
And I was like
Okay.
at the bank taking
Yeah.
out a line of credit. And there was just this feeling in me like, this isn't what I want.
Right.
Or this doesn't make sense for me right now. And I think starting a business too, and especially in my first few years, are people, you tell them what you do and they're like, oh, where's your shop?
Right.
And so it was almost, there was a shame attached to that of me saying like, oh, I don't have a shop. I just work, I just work from home.
Right. Right.
And so there was like this feeling for a while of this pressure of like, oh, I have to have a brick and mortar to be a legitimate
Yes.
business owner. And so that was the thing I struggled with for a little bit, where if I, at any point, if I really thought about it, knew it didn't align with me.
Right.
But there were moments where I was like, oh, maybe I could do this, or maybe I could have like a flower truck and have like a food truck style. And like, there's all these ideas, of course, that sound like fun.
Right.
But I'm really glad that I've really stayed true to myself in like knowing what's for me, what's not, or what's for me in a certain time that maybe isn't at another time. I've been really intentional with all of that.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like we don't do that very often. Like, I don't know how many times, we've been doing this podcast for a long time, and I look at all this stuff and it's like, how to make $1 million. I was like, yeah, but what if I just want to live in the woods and take care of flowers and pet some animals?
And $1 million would be great, but that's not more important to me than, Yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah.
To me, it's like, what do you want every day to look like? And that's the question that I'm like, what do you want every day when you wake up and we, live and breathe? What do you want? And to me, when I look at any of the things you're doing, and I'm like, oh, I feel like she's happy. Yeah. And I was like, that's good. I want more people to just be happy with the things they're doing.
Exactly. And that wasn't always the case too. Like, and like you said, asking yourself how you want to live each day and where you want to be, is I've been picturing this for myself forever, and I've been trying to get out of the city forever, so I have this space to grow. And when I lived here, every weekend I would be out in the woods.
Right.
And so people see this lifestyle that I've been living for years, but it's just, I was just squeezing it in where I could.
Right.
And like getting that taste of it, so I knew how it felt, and I could like hold on to that and visualize it and get there, but that hasn't always been the case. But I think, visualizing like how you want to spend each day, like when I would really think about it, like I would love to just like wake up and like not even have to put shoes on and walk out to my garden, or like not have to get dressed, like
right.
Living in the city, even having my gardens here, was like, okay, if I go downstairs, I'm going to see my landlord. I should put some clothes on. But I just like envisioned like this like sense of more like freedom around it, which would allow me to feed that into my business more. Yeah.
You talked about two other things that I read that I think were really interesting. Talked about the accidental paths and surrendering to the creative process, and I love the way you said surrendering to the creative process. Like, just when that happens, you just let it happen. And this idea of the accidental path, which now that we've talked for a while, I feel like that's something that has happened, and I don't know why more people don't trust that. I think it's scary, right?
It's scary.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard to differentiate. Yeah, and I think you get better at that over time.
I think you have to keep practicing it, right?
It's definitely a muscle.
You're like, okay, I'm gonna.
It's a muscle, and the more you exercise it or practice it, and I think there is a lot of obviously value in leaping and jumping and taking the opportunities, but on the balanced side, there's also like the awareness around it of like, I think it's important to take risks, and I'm not saying I've never taken risks, but to be choosy about those risks that you're taking.
Right.
Like there's a fine line there of like, yes, doing the thing and going for it with what you've got available and like jumping in, but also there's like that step back of like, is the timing right? Is this right for me? And the accidental paths is like this. I always think, and this is what I love about the community, is like this person has crossed my path for a reason. Maybe the opportunity they're presenting me with isn't aligned with me and my business right now, but this person is still
I want them in my life.
The connection.
Somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's always a reason for that, for sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
When it was funny, this is a lot, but I want to go back, but when you were talking about like squeezing it in, I remember specifically, I don't know, this is many years ago, but I remember being at the coffee shop, and I remember, I think you were like, oh, what are you getting up to the weekend? And I told you, and then I was like, what are you getting up to? And all I remember, he was like, oh, I'm just going to go in my car, I'm going to go in the woods, and I'm picking some mushrooms. Yeah. And I was like, that was the fun. And I was like, that, I still have that memory of like, you know, like that just sounded so nice to me. I was like, that's what I'm doing on Saturday. Yeah. I'm just going to go pick some mushrooms.
I'm just going to go get out, like, exactly, not really have a destination. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like something I was probably up to.
I love that. Well, I have one or two last questions for you. Okay. I'm curious about what's one thing right now that you could use as a creative person that would move you forward?
My initial, like, when I think like material things, is I'm really thinking like a studio space is my next step. That would really help me separate like life and business, and I think in turn make me like feel just more creative and just have this space. Right. So maybe the not material answer is space. Just like not a physical space, but like even just allowing myself the space to, again, play more, create more. Yeah, the downtime, I guess, which is what I get in the winter. But there's no flowers to play with. Right. So, yeah.
Do you ever feel like you need to move to a place that doesn't have the winter?
No. I need that break.
Okay, you need that break.
I need that break. I think it's very, like, and again, in that whole, like, surrendering, like, nature's got a plan. I could work through the winter and order flowers in, or I could, like a lot of people will put up greenhouses and extend their season as much as possible and make more money, and that's great. But I don't want to mess with that. Again, it comes down to that forced feeling. Right. I want to, like, I just want it to feel really natural. And winter, like, we have it for a reason. It's a period of, like, rest and regeneration. Yep. The bulbs need it. The, like nature needs it. And I think we need it, too. And I could grind through the year and really stretch things out. But I don't want to. Yeah, that's fair. That's the answer. Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I love that. Well, and that goes back to, like, what do you want your days to look like? Yeah. You know, yeah. Could winter be more of a playful time, though? That might be interesting to me. Yeah, I think I could play in other ways. Like this winter, like for Christmas, my partner got me a paint by numbers set. Like I can find ways to play that aren't monetarily. Right, yeah. Or like extensions of my business. I also, like, people will ask me, or I know like flower farmers who will just go away for the winter and go spend it in Mexico and chill. Yeah. But I still, like, I'm coming to terms with winter and I don't love it, but there's something there that, like, I need. Right. You know? Like, it's good for me. It's good to have that downtime and space. Yeah. That's awesome. But maybe I could find other ways to play. Like, I tried getting into knitting and it, like, wasn't really my thing, but there's something. there's definitely something. There's something out there for sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's great. And then so my last question is kind of a weird one and a big one, but I love it already.
Yeah. What's your biggest fear as a creative?
Okay. Am I allowed to cry?
Yes.
What's my biggest fear? My biggest fear would be not being able to do what I do anymore, and be that through, like, the trust of people or the economy or anything. Like, I think my biggest fear would be not having the leisure of doing what I love for work, like that being taken away from me. So, like, not to get too doomsday-y, but I would hate global warming is a real thing. And then, like, it's a good thing for growing flowers right now because our season is a little bit longer. But, like, I don't know. Like, sometimes I'm like, oh, my gosh, I'm putting all this infrastructure in and, like, growing flowers. I'm like, I hope I can do that for my whole life. But, like, I don't know if, like, nature's going to let us do that. So that's, like, a really scary thing. Sorry. Yeah. That's great. I'm not going to cry. But, yeah, another scary thing would just be people not trusting me, like, for whatever reason. Like, I'm really lucky right now that people see what I do and they're into it for whatever reason, and it resonates with them and they trust me to be like, hey, do your thing. And so, yeah, a big fear of mine would be for people to not give me that creative freedom or trust me.
Yeah.
That would be scary.
Yeah, that would be really scary.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know what you would have to do for that to happen, but
Makes it.
yeah,
I don't know.
Don't do whatever that is.
I'll try.
I feel like you're on a good path. I feel like you've been on a pretty good path for many years.
Tastes could change.
That's true.
Things shift, but yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like people, like what you said earlier, though, but like people, I think that's actually a message that I would love on this podcast more and more is like people work with you because they like you as a person. They love your stuff and they love what you're doing as well.
Right.
But I feel like they also are buying you.
Totally.
You know?
And so, but that would be scary.
Like
and that's a really dangerous connection. And that is something I believe in truly. And that's how I participate in the economy. But that's dangerous because you're tied so closely to it that if someone doesn't like your bouquet, you're like, oh my God, am I a terrible person? Or, it's hard to separate yourself when like you are your work so deeply. It's hard to like not take everything personally.
Right.
Or if, let's say, someone didn't like what I was wearing and they're like, I don't trust, she can't pick out an outfit, so I can't trust her to pick out nice flowers. I don't know. I'm like over dramatizing it. But, or Leah said, oh, Leah believes in global warming. I don't, and now I can't buy her. Like anything you say could be reflected in you as a person and therefore you as a business.
Yeah, I like that though. I do like that because I want to work with the people that
believe in the
like I'm like, oh great, you don't like the way I dress, so you don't want to work with me. That's fine.
Yeah,
we're not gonna get along anyway.
We're not gonna jive. Exactly.
Like it's so funny to me. I've spent many years speaking, going on stages, whatever. I very rarely ever dress up. I mean, I put pants on when people come over, and that's so you're welcome. And like, and when we're sitting in fields, I put pants on, but other than that, it's like funny because I've been on stages where people are like, oh, like, do you need time to go get changed? Or, and I can see, and I'm like, no, because
like, this is
this is me. And like, be yourself.
Express yourself.
That's what I love about
and be comfortable.
Yeah.
Like I would hope for you and my business, like the dream is that you don't get that far into something without realizing that, for me, it's like, okay, here's how I operate. If you don't like it, like I can refer you to someone who's a little more your style or,
totally.
Here's how I do things. If you like it, great. I'm going to wear shorts to your wedding. Like
that's just how it works.
What it is. Yeah.
This is who I am.
Promise you that it's going to be worth it.
And being like very confident. I don't know how people, I think we lose that confidence a lot. That's one of the other things that I've always admired about you and your work and what you're doing is like every time I look at it, I'm like, that is just Leah. Like it or don't or whatever, it's fine. But like Leah is Leah.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always been like, yeah, fuck yeah.
Cool. That's funny because that was almost my question when you said something like, what could you use more of as a creative or a small business? One of my thoughts was more confidence. Because there's that like doubt all the time, and it's easy to see people and be like, they're killing it.
Yeah.
Like they're probably not, or they are sometimes, and they are not sometimes. Right. And like that's another thing too is with the whole social media thing is I think it's really easy. And actually, I was listening to one of your other podcasts where someone was sharing about how they just share everything on social media, which is great, and I admire that, and I love to like watch that as a consumer.
Yeah,
but I am quite. I don't know. There's like a thought around it of like, I don't assume everything is all perfect and confidence when I see someone's page because there's this whole thing about how like we're all just sharing our highlight reels and whatever. And that's true. And I think there's a lot of value in sharing other things as well. But I also think like the biggest thought of mine there is like, when did we stop assuming people's humanity based on what they're showing us? Like if I look at your social media and I see all this great times, like I'm like, great, Sean's having a great time and he's killing it, but I don't separate that from you as a person. Like, and I don't assume that your life is perfect, but so many people do, and that's become so normal now that unless you're sharing everything or all the downsides too, is like people assume like it's all great. And even if it is mostly great, like it's not always great, but I think that we all owe each other the
it's true.
discretion. Is it discretion? Just like I don't know, like not dehumanizing, assuming someone isn't human based on what they're sharing.
Well, and also you're seeing this, like you said, like you're seeing a very small thing. Like
totally.
I'm laughing because people always say like, oh, like, you know, you don't travel very much. And I'm like, oh no, I travel a lot. And they're
I
like,
just don't share it.
Oh, but I've never seen a picture of it. I was like,
Good.
Correct.
Yeah, amazing.
Correct.
I love that.
I am allowed to travel without putting, and they're like, but you share lots of other things. I'm like, right.
Yeah.
And
You're allowed to choose, like...
like when I travel, I just don't.
Good for
and I don't want to. And you don't need to know where I was.
Exactly. And
I was there.
That's like, I wish for that sometimes too, is like, then you get to run into someone and they're like, what have you been up to? And you're like, oh, I was just in New York. And they're like, what? And then you get to tell them all about it. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw you in New York. Oh yeah, I saw you had some bagels. It's like... By withholding that, you're actually like allowing this whole like deeper conversation too.
That's so funny. Yeah, I met up. Everybody meets up. I met up with a friend who I haven't seen in a while, and he was telling me all those things. I was like, "Yep, saw that." Like, I was like, check. Yeah, whatever. Totally. And I'm like, all right, well, is that it then? I'm gonna
I'm gonna go back home and look at you on the internet.
I guess we're done now. Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah. Oh man. Well, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for coming and having this conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So what's the next big thing? I mean, we're gonna have a studio space?
We're gonna have a studio space.
Yeah, is that the next big thing for Homebody?
Yeah, it's also been a dream of mine since I was a kid. If we're talking about like past me thinking I was cool, loved HGTV and like renos and building things. So I'm gonna pretend I'm on HGTV and build myself a studio.
I love it.
With no prior knowledge.
Amazing. I love it. Well, I hope everybody comes and visits the Homebody Floral Company studio.
Come see the flowers, come see the studio when it exists, and come see the gardens.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
for having me. It's so fun. It's good to be back in the hood.
We did it. Amazing, right? Like, thank you so much to Leah for coming in, giving us all that motivation, energy, just a wonderful, wonderful presence. I love the positive stuff. And if you don't have fresh flowers at your table, what do you do with your life? Go get yourself some fresh flowers. You deserve it. Go support your local florist. Get yourself some nice flowers and think about this. And I got something I want you to think about, right? I love this conversation, and I love that Leah's journey is there. And if you follow her Instagram, all the links, of course, to everything that Leah's doing, it will be in the descriptions down below. Go follow along. I know we talked a little bit about how everything's not always perfect, but when you follow along on her page, it's just filled with so much beauty, and it just makes you feel good, So go follow along on her journey. But I wanted to talk about a little bit here just before we wrap up. Surrendering to the creative process and the accidental path, right? She talked about it before in an earlier interview, and then we got a chance to talk a little bit about it again in this conversation. And I want you guys to really think about that, right? Thinking about surrendering to the creative process, like when the creative process hits you. And we have definitely talked about that before. Dom Laporte has talked about it. I'm pretty sure Brenda and I talked about it. Art and Jest in a previous episode. And I know there's been countless others where, like, when it hits, you just have to do the thing, right? And there's nothing else you can do. And I think that's important. Like, let that happen, and also have the tools around you that are necessary to do that, right? I've recently been making sure that I have a notebook in my pocket at all times. So I'm buying shirts that have pockets up here because I always want to have a notebook in here, because I'm constantly writing down little titles or little project things or whatever else I'm thinking about. It's in there, and it's just a small switch. It's a small habit, but man, has it made a huge difference. And then, of course, the accidental path. Like, the accidental path happens, right? Keep paying attention to what's bringing you joy in life, right? And I have 2 questions for you. These are very specific questions that I want you to ask yourself. If you've made it to the end, I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate every single person who's been here, and I want you to think about these 2 things. What would your younger self be proud of you for today? Like right now, in this moment, if you thought back to 7-year-old you, what would they say that they would be proud of you for doing? Because there is something that your younger self would be so proud of you for doing, or being like super stoked about. But also, I want you to ask this question as well. What is your younger self still waiting for you to do? Right? What is your younger self still waiting for you to do? Ask yourself that question. because it's going to tell you a lot, and it's so important, because I think Leah's journey, along with so many other creatives, is so evident that, like, if we keep listening to ourselves and we stop forgetting, right? Don't forget. We had these early gut interactions, right? We have these early gut visceral things that are like, go do this, and then life hits us, right? And go back and listen to the trusting your gut episode too, because your early gut is so right all the time. I have seen it happen time and time and time again. That if you listen to your earlier self, your younger self, it's often going to put you in a good space, because our younger self is so much more attuned to self, and so little attuned to everything else on the world and like what's impacting us. And that's why I think it is often one of the truer selves. And I really appreciate that about this conversation. So please go give Leah a follow. Please give this episode a like, and get out there and go do some more cool shit. I really appreciate you guys. I hope you guys have an amazing friggin' weekend. We'll see you again. We'll see you again in another episode on July 8th.